Hi. I prepared my presentation in German, but I tried to switch to English and do it on the fly. Sorry if I'm kind of stuttering in between, but I at least will try. Okay, welcome to my presentation, the workflows of Drüberbrook and what you can learn about game development from movie productions. First, I'd like to show our Kickstarter story teaser to put us all on the same page about the project. I think it should come next.
You can imagine it as a rift, a junction in space-time. Your mind enters a stage of near transcendence, and suddenly, bam, you see a myriad of possibilities exploding right in front of you.
Beverly, you wouldn't believe what a charming little place they've sent me to. Feeling chilled out already. Hang on. What is this?
You have to see the whole picture. If I could just open your eyes.
What was your name again? Tenhauser?
Hello?
So you're from the States, right?
Well, I'm a physicist. I'm working on a text and I could really use some serenity.
This is puzzling. Who on earth would steal a paper on quantum physics?
There's a large network, like wormholes connecting different dimensions.
Tenhauser, these are ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. What are they doing here?
Your world is going to collapse. Everything will collapse.
As if there was anything worth preserving in this red hole.
Some people are scoundrels, others are not. Yes, that's how it is.
Wait a second. Am I pointing the wrong direction? Sorry. Yeah, no, okay, sorry. I think I'm holding it the wrong way. All right, first I'd like to talk a bit about the backgrounds of the project and the company who's doing it. We're BTF, and I think most people, especially here from Germany, know BTF from Neo Magazin Royale. For all of you who don't know Neo Magazin Royale, it's with Jan Böhmermann, this guy in the middle. He's the guy who had a fight with the Turkish president Erdogan and kind of changed a law here and stuff. Yeah, and we're mostly doing movies and advertising and TV series. For example, Gute Arbeit Originals, which was a YouTube format, or Schulz und Böhmermann. We also recently did an exhibition about all the projects. So we were also like kind of going into new directions, and it didn't take us long to also explore the field of computer games. It all started off in 2015 and 16 when we published our first games linked to the Neo Magazin Royale. So they're set in the Neo Magazin Royale cosmos, the game Royales. And yeah, they were just like funny little games, 40 minutes long, just to expand the Neo Magazin cosmos. But in 2013, the author of the game, Florian Köhne of Drüberbrook, already started to dig a bit into the concepts and the story of Drüberbrook. First, we wanted to have Drüberbrook a little bit in a style like the Neo Magazin game, so in a retro pixel style. But the BTF and Florian himself had a lot of experience with scale modeling films and little stop-motion animations. So Florian, on the left side, you can see his bachelor thesis video concerning dinosaurs, where he like had this little animation video explaining stuff about dinosaurs. And also the BTF had a very early project, a movie called Armadingen, where we had like those dreamlike sequences, also filmed in stop motion and with scale models. So it was pretty clear at some point that this style would benefit our game. Right now, we're having our base in Berlin, but the BTF itself is in Cologne. We're a very small team in Berlin, so only 3 to 5 people at its core. That's Flo at the left. As I said, he started the whole thing. He's the author, and he got us all together for this project. Simon is our programmer, and I'm concerned with all the 3D stuff and our special 3D pipeline. But we have like over 50 people working on the whole project, so we're getting a lot of help from Cologne, a lot of experience. I can't name them all, but it's Jakob doing the animations and the head of post-production doing all the color grading for our game, and so on. Here in the image you can see the Lea on the left, which is our producer, Lea in the middle, which did all the scale models, or she worked with her team on the scale models, and Benny, who did the character sketches, also those here. Yeah, and we kickstarted our project, or we started off with our project by getting funding from the Medienbord Berlin-Brandenburg that kind of helped us to start the whole project and to build a few miniatures, test a few things. But this project is not very typical for stuff the BTF does, because most of the time we do advertising, we're getting the money in advance, or doing it for ARD, or ZDF, sorry. There was also stuff done for ARD, but most of the things are for ZDF and ZDF Neo. And that's why we wanted to look in other models of financing, and we got to Kickstarter, which got us almost 200,000 euros and quite a solid base, quite a solid community. And that actually helped us to keep the financing stable for the project. Just to give you like an overview for the project, we're having a game that's kind of settled in between of classical adventure games, so all the old LucasArts and Sierra games, and more modern games like, for example, Life is Strange. So we're also having those inventory puzzles, for example, but we kind of streamlining them to have the experience more on the narrative of the game. We want to have the game be in between 6 to 9 hours of gameplay, and want to publish it for all the major platforms, so PC, Mac, Linux, and the consoles, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Switch. And we're developing that with our publisher, Head Up Games, so that we can spread this all at once. And one special thing about the game is, I think, that we are kind of having this genre mix between science fiction and mystery on the one side, and Heimatfilm, and I don't think there really is a translation for Heimatfilm, on the other side. Just to explain it real quickly, Heimatfilm is this concept of a movie being set in a local, in a regional area, very cheesy often, and we're mixing that with our sci-fi story. The biggest inspiration for this is, I think, Twin Peaks. Also, Flo said that. Twin Peaks at its time also had like those mystery elements combined with Heimatfilm motives. And there are also many other inspirations we have, for example, The X-Files or Stranger Things. And yeah, that's kind of where we're coming from. And they all have something in common. Most of our inspirations have something in common, and that is they're all set in a very restricted setting, in a very small setting. The setting is kept pretty small, and we get to know the characters, might it be in suburbs, might it be in small towns or in countrysides. We get to know the characters with all their strange features and also all their secrets. There are other examples for this. For example, True Detective, which is set in the States, in the south of the States. Or, for example, a very recent example is 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, which also shows this very restricted area, and we got to know all the characters and how the town functions. And we wanted to have the same thing for our project. And Flo, very early in the production, noticed that this is a trend in movies, that we have many movies coming out showing those limited settings and telling stories in this setting. And I think this is one takeaway we can learn from movies, but I'll get to that later. The next thing is I want to talk about our very special workflows, or our very special main workflow, because we're not the first game trying to get scale models into a game and making them sets for a game, but we're having our very own workflow for that. So there was The Neverhood in the 90s by DreamWorks Interactive. They made photos of clay models and used that as levels. And the spiritual successor, Armacroc, also did this in 2015. This worked quite well. And there was also another project called Luminosity, and they even used like little film sequences for camera movement. But also basically the same idea. They had a backdrop of images and showed characters in front of it. Right now, there's a game in production in Cologne called Harold Halibut, and they're also using scale models for their sets, and they're using photogrammetry to get all the little real-world assets in their game. And we kind of have a workflow in between all of those, and that's why I'm showing you this. We came up with our very own workflow, and the thing is that we wanted to have, like on this slide, we wanted to have the real lighting and all the features real lighting brings with it. And you can never achieve this, at least not right now, in all its detail with computer graphics. And that's why we wanted to have all the sets photographed. But at the same time, we want to have the freedom to have a smooth camera movement like the folks of Slowbros have in Harold Halibut. So we have like those two workflows for our 3D assets. One is for the characters and all the things that are moving. That's a pretty common workflow, the normal workflow for games. So we're 3D modeling them in high poly and low poly, texturing them, rigging them, and animating them. And later we're combining them with our sets. And the sets are the thing I want to talk about today, because that's our real special workflow, and I will guide you guys through all the points listed here. So it all starts off with building the models. The models are built with a lot of passion and a lot of love by some people. I think it's 6 in total, maybe more. I don't want to say something wrong. One team is in Berlin and one is in Cologne, and it took them weeks to finish the models, but they're very rich in detail, and I think it's quite worth it. And as soon as we have 3 or more models finished, we're starting to shoot them. And to shoot them means we're doing different kind of photos. So one thing is we're doing like those very scenical lit photos you can see on the left. So for most of the sets, it's only one photo from one point of view. For example, for this, the treehouse, we had more photos because it wasn't possible to capture the whole set in a sufficient resolution. So we had more than one photo, but for most sets, it's just one. And we're grading them, we're putting backdrops on them, and that's basically what you will see more or less in the game. And in the second pass, we're doing photogrammetry images, which is photographing the model from all sides, from as many angles as possible, in a very neutral setting, because black and white pixels don't really have information to scan it, and that's what we're using them for. We're putting all those images in a software called Capturing Reality, and there it calculates a 3D model for us, and that's why we need very neutral lighting, and that's why also we can't use the photos from before, because they have very harsh shadows, they have black areas, and that's not sufficient for 3D scanning. All those black areas in the shadow would basically be wrong in the scan. And that, for example, with the photogrammetry, that's a trend coming up in the game industry, and you see it more and more. It's commonly used for facial animation and characters. I think many people of you have seen the actors being surrounded by many cameras. That's actually photogrammetry. Here we're using it to have our sets digitalized, and that's also a thing becoming more and more common in computer games, for example, in the last Star Wars Battlefront and in the last Resident Evil, I think. And yeah, if we have this model scanned, we basically have it as a digital form, but it has more than, I think, 30 million polygons. And as many of you might know, this is not really what you can put in a game engine. And that's why we're retopologizing them. So for most parts by hand, for some parts we can do it with an auto-retopo. We're just taking the models and try to retopologize the edge flows so it doesn't have 30 million, but maybe 10 to 30,000 polygons. In the next step, we're calculating a camera which has the exact same view on the 3D model as the camera in the real setting had on the real models. So this is a very important step, because if you have that, if you have like a digital view on the model which is exactly the same than in the real world, and for the real model, you can basically project the photo as a texture. So here you can see for one set, this is like the town hall or the town place in the middle of Trüberbrook. And we're projecting the texture from one camera onto the mesh, and then we can bake it as a texture. And it's fixed with all the lighting in it. And as you also can see, behind those objects, there are occluded parts. That means that there's no information in the image to cover those parts. So the stuff from the front is just projected on the back. You can see it on the right. And so in the next step, we're going into Substance Painter after we baked the textures. And here you can see one set from above. The left one is before, the right one is after it, and we're just stamping out the parts. We can do this because from the start of the project, we knew we have very limited range of camera movement, and we don't want to see the models from all sides. That's why we can do it. If you wanted to have a model which, for example, can be seen from all sides, you could just do more photos of it. So you could do like a triplanar projection from it, and then you could see the model from all sides. But for us, it was enough to just take one photo and stamp out parts that are behind those, because for most parts, our camera angles are the same than on the photos. And if we finish that, there's one more thing we have to do, and that's the very tricky part about our workflow, because all the lighting information is already baked into the sets. So if you ever baked a lighting, you know what that means in a 3D application. So we have all the information of lights and shadows already in it. And if a character stands in there and gets lit by real-time lights, he might cast shadows additional to the shadows in the image. So we're having a shader which basically has a second map in it, showing you can cast shadows here in the bright areas, and you cannot cast shadows here in the dark areas. And the bright areas also show which color the shadow can have. And so it's not overlapping. We're having basically the same shadow then in the images. And to round the whole thing up, we're just putting the characters in the engine, trying to match the lighting of the scene, placing 3D lights in the 3D space to match the characters as close as possible. And then we add a lot of post-production, so particle effects. As you can see in the background, we add water and backdrops. And that's basically how we build our sets. So here are a few screenshots. Here we added like those God rays coming from the window. And yeah, we also have some special scenes. As you saw in the video, there's this one scene where they're having the flashlights, and they're trying to seek stuff in the room. And for this, for example, we're taking multiple passes. So we have one dark pass, and we're having one lit pass with a light on the point exactly where the characters stand. And in the real-time engine, we're just uncovering the parts lit by the left image and just projected on the right side. So this is it's kind of real-time, but it's also baked, and it's two textures. And we're having many parts like that in the game. So we're not really having that one workflow. Most models share one workflow, but there are also special special scenes where we need to find other solutions, for example. So what can you learn from our production? As I mentioned earlier, you can get to know trends very early. So when Flo noticed this trend of very regional settings, he also wanted to have that for Trüberbrook, and I think it's a very nice way to analyze what's going on in the media in total, but in films especially. And you can see, can I maybe take something away from my own game from this? And the good thing about it is that the analysis is much more precise than just saying, I want to make a game that's like Blade Runner, but just a game. And yeah, that's it. And we also noticed that you can experiment very, very well with workflows that are not used in games very often, but used in other media. And in our case, it was matte painting workflows. So the whole projection stuff is used quite commonly in matte painting workflows. And maybe you can, for your projects, also find other workflows not really used in games, but maybe in films, and create something new. And I think that's also where the spark of innovation can be. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Haben Sie Fragen? Deutsch, Englisch, wie auch immer. Da ist eine. Warten Sie, bis das Mikrofon kommt. Just wait for the microphone. Oder? Jetzt hört man sie nicht überall gleich laut.
Well, thank you for the talk, and that's a really impressive and scary amount of work you're putting into this.
Thank you.
Really impressive. How do you handle interaction with your environments? Like, we just saw the suitcase there. I'm guessing you'd probably interact as a player with that. How does that work?
That's a very good question, because that's the most tricky part in our workflow right now. Everything that's picked up and that's very prominent in the picture is also real-time lit, like the characters themselves. We have some parts that are moving, for example, leaves and trees, and if the movement is very subtle, you can just take the stuff that has baked lighting in it. But for all the stuff that is moving in the scene, we either have to trick or we have to do real-time lighting, like for the characters.
So who was the director? Where did he sit? And how did he communicate with the others?
The director is Flo, the author also. So he manages the whole project. And our office in Berlin is quite young, actually. We started it in May last year, and that's also when the production really kicked off. And we're communicating about a few platforms. We're also doing some stuff for Cologne and Berlin, so for the TV shows and the movies. And yeah, I think sometimes communication over those distances is quite difficult. But for most times, for example, we're having a lot of Skype conferences with the animator, and he's showing us progress really frequently. And it's working quite well. And very often also people come from Cologne for a few weeks of very intensive work together, and where we have to find out and figure out special problems. But I think in this big infrastructure the BTF also had before, it's working quite well.
One last question. Maybe two. Well,
What would be the main age group you're making this game for?
I don't really think there is like this main age group, but there is a player group, and that's all those people who enjoy adventure games, especially the old titles. Because as you can see from the camera angles, it's also in totals, like the old Sierra games and the, for example, Monkey Island from LucasArts. And many gameplay parts are also inspired by the old titles. But it's just, Flo always says like it's just for people who like good stories. I think maybe that's a bit too easy, but basically that's it. So like, for example, Life is Strange. It's just people who want to have a good experience in stories and maybe a gameplay that's not too fast, but quite challenging at some points. But also, I think I can add something here, because at one talk, there was this girl coming up to us, and she had this big eyes, and all the stuff just fascinated her about the small scale models. And at this point, we also thought about maybe we could make a version for kids. So the game has some points which are more for adults. For example, the main character, whenever he's in his idle, he starts to smoke and then just throws away his cigarette. And maybe we're just changing that to a lollipop or something, and making a more child-friendly version.
It looks pretty impressive.
Thanks.
It's like Twin Peaks met Wes Anderson somehow. Can you tell us a little bit more about the gameplay? Because it's the trailer that we've seen was mostly as kind of a little movie.
Yeah.
And as a game maker, I would like to know more about how would you combine it and like integrate it with the gameplay there is.
Yeah, the gameplay is pretty much the adventure games gameplay from the old games, but infused with more modern stuff. For example, we have an inventory system, but it's kind of streamlined, so you cannot combine every object with every other object, because that would bring us an explosion of possibilities. And since we're having the character really talk about everything, that would make the workflow, or that would kill the workflow, that would make our work explode. And so we streamlined that a little bit. For example, when you're picking up some objects that need to be combined, you can click on the object in the world you want to combine it with, and it already shows you, for example, you can use this object, or this object, and maybe you can use those 3 objects at once to solve the puzzle. So I think we don't want the game to be too hard, like the old games that you just sit in front of the riddle for 2 or 3 hours and just cannot figure it out. We want to have it a bit more streamlined to let people and let players experience the story a bit more, because that's the focus, the world and the story.
So it's mostly about riddle solving, or is there also a dimension of making choices in the way of like...
There is one choice, more or less, at the end, but it's more about riddle solving, and also having conversations with the people in Trüberbrook, and like dialogue riddles and stuff like that. But yeah, as I said, it's mechanics from old adventure games. So yeah.
Any more questions? That was Christian.
Well, I'm just wondering about, those old games were made before the internet.
Sorry?
Those old games were made before the internet, and you couldn't Google the answer. So how do you deal with that? Every time I meet a problem, I'm like, oh. And then it's solved. Oh.
Yeah, I quite recently played Timbleweed Park, and actually I also had to Google a few things. But I think that's just play style, you know. If you're having a focus on experiencing the story, then it's totally fine to Google the riddles. But if you see it as more of a challenge, I think people who see a challenge in those riddles don't really want to Google the solution. They have a pride in solving it themselves and stuff like that.
And they have no willpower.
Yeah, the willpower. And I think for games like that, it's totally fine if you Google the answer. I mean, it's quite frustrating to sit in front of the same riddle for hours and not solving it, and the characters are giving you the same answers for hours. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Hans, for giving us this insight, and also thinking outside the box, looking at other areas to integrate things into game development. Thank you very much. Hans Brunner.